On December 21, 2024, Hollywood director Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead in their Brentwood home. Their 32-year-old son, Nick, has been charged with their murders. But the story that's emerged from that weekend, captured on surveillance footage, witnessed by Hollywood's elite, and documented in police reports, reveals something far more complex than a simple crime scene. This is what actually happened in those final 48 hours. Rob Reiner wasn't just any director. He was the man behind The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and Stand By Me. His career spanned decades, and he'd built a reputation as someone who understood human connection, loyalty, and family dynamics. That reputation made what happened on that December weekend even more shocking to those who knew him. The timeline that investigators pieced together starts on Saturday, December 20th, 2024, at Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party. This wasn't just any Hollywood gathering. O'Brien's estate has a reputation as a safe space where industry figures can relax away from cameras and scrutiny. But when Rob Reiner, his wife Michelle, and their son Nick arrived that evening, guests immediately sensed something was wrong. According to multiple witnesses who spoke to investigators, Nick Reiner's behavior at the party was alarming. He had shaved his head and moved through the crowd with what attendees described as unsettling focus. One incident stood out. Nick approached comedian Bill Hader and asked him point-blank, "What's your name? Are you famous?" When Hader indicated they were having a private conversation, Nick reportedly stood still, stared, and then stormed off. This wasn't typical social awkwardness. Witnesses told police that Nick seemed to be testing boundaries, challenging the very people his father had worked with for years. The confrontation escalated into what multiple sources describe as a very loud argument between Rob, Michelle, and Nick, loud enough that it couldn't be ignored by other guests. What happened next became one of the most controversial details to emerge. According to reports, when guests wanted to call 911 due to Nick's behavior, Conan O'Brien reportedly discouraged them from doing so. This decision would haunt everyone present. Had that call been made, Nick could have been placed on a psychiatric hold that night. Rob and Michelle Reiner might still be alive. Before leaving the party, Rob Reiner pulled a close friend aside. The words he spoke weren't dramatic. They were terrified. "I'm scared," he told them. "I don't know what he's going to do next." That confession, whispered under the cover of holiday music, would prove prophetic. The family left the party and returned to their Brentwood estate. What happened inside that house over the next several hours remains known only through forensic evidence, and the scene investigators would find the following morning. Sunday, December 21st, began ordinarily enough. A massage therapist arrived at the Reiner estate for a scheduled appointment with Rob and Michelle. When she couldn't reach them by phone or intercom, she made a decision that would crack the case open. She called Romy Reiner, the couple's daughter who lived across the street. Romy didn't hesitate. She ran from her home to her parents' house with her roommate. What she found when she entered would change everything. According to later reports, Romy discovered her father first. The scene was so devastating that she immediately fled the house, collapsing in the driveway. She never made it to where her mother was found. Paramedics arriving later would be the ones to confirm that Michelle was also deceased. The forensic evidence told investigators several critical facts. There was no forced entry. The alarm system hadn't been triggered. Nothing was broken or shattered. Every detail that would typically indicate a break-in was absent. This wasn't an invasion from outside. The threat had come from within. The Los Angeles Police Department's investigation moved quickly. Using surveillance footage, cell phone data, and credit card transactions, they tracked Nick Reiner's movements after leaving the Brentwood home. What they found contradicted the defense narrative that would later emerge about complete mental collapse. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on Sunday, roughly 6 hours after the bodies were discovered, surveillance cameras at a gas station near Exposition Boulevard and Vermont Avenue, about 15 miles from Brentwood, captured clear footage of Nick Reiner. He was wearing a black and green jacket and a baseball cap with a bright red backpack on his shoulders. The footage shows him shopping calmly. He browsed the aisles, selected a sports drink from the cooler, stood in line behind other customers, and paid with a credit card. The cashier who served him later told investigators he seemed completely normal, polite, calm, no visible distress. This detail proved crucial to prosecutors building their case. Former FBI specialist Mary Ellen O'Toole, who has analyzed the case, pointed out what this footage reveals. Nick Reiner had the mental capacity to navigate public transportation across Los Angeles, make rational consumer decisions, and interact appropriately with strangers. This wasn't someone in a complete psychotic break. This was someone functioning, planning, and evading detection. After the gas station, Nick checked into a hotel in Santa Monica. Investigators later learned that he covered the hotel room windows with sheets, an act that suggests awareness of being searched for and a desire to avoid detection. This wasn't confusion, it was concealment. When LAPD officers finally located and arrested Nick Reiner, there was no dramatic standoff. He surrendered without resistance. Since his arrest, he has been held in a specialized medical ward at the LA County Jail, completely isolated from general population and under 24/7 video surveillance. The medical details that have emerged paint a complicated picture. NBC4 confirmed that Nick had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was under psychiatric care. In the month before the murders, his behavior had become increasingly erratic and dangerous. 3 to 4 weeks before December 21st, doctors changed his medication regimen. Anyone familiar with psychiatric treatment knows this is a critical period. When medications for mental illness are adjusted, there's often a period of instability. The dosages need to be calibrated precisely, and when they're wrong, symptoms can worsen dramatically. Sources told NBC4 that the new medications appeared to exacerbate Nick's condition rather than help it. Doctors were trying to adjust the treatment, but Nick was, in their words, spinning out of control and out of his head. Complicating this further were reports that Nick was also using illegal drugs, which can severely worsen schizophrenia symptoms and interfere with prescribed medications. The forensic evidence from the crime scene tells its own story. Rob and Michelle Reiner died from what official reports describe as multiple sharp force injuries. Forensic profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole explained what this means. The attack was close range, personal, and driven by intense emotion. This type of violence isn't distant or detached. It requires physical proximity and reveals deep psychological connection to the victims. O'Toole used the term overkill to describe the pattern of injuries, meaning the force used went far beyond what would be necessary to cause death. In forensic psychology, this indicates rage, years of built-up resentment, and unresolved emotional conflict exploding in physical form. Another forensic detail emerged that could prove critical at trial. When extreme force is used in close-range attacks with sharp instruments, the person wielding the weapon almost always suffers injuries themselves. Hands slip, grip fails, and what forensic experts call commingled biology occurs. The attacker's DNA becomes mixed with the victim's at the exact moment of the violence. This type of evidence is nearly impossible to explain away because it places someone at the precise center of the act. The legal proceedings have been complicated by Nick's mental health history. He faces 2 counts of murder and could receive life in prison without parole or potentially the death penalty. The prosecution has made clear they're willing to use the death penalty as leverage in negotiations. In a statement released after their parents' deaths, Rob and Michelle's 2 other children, Jake and Romy Reiner, wrote, "Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing. They weren't just our parents. They were our best friends." The tragedy has forced uncomfortable conversations about mental illness, family responsibility, and the limits of love. Rob Reiner spent his career telling stories about loyalty, connection, and standing by people you love. He and Michelle apparently held on to hope that they could help their son, even as his behavior became increasingly dangerous. The question that haunts everyone who knew the family is whether more could have been done. Should 911 have been called at that Christmas party? Should Nick have been involuntarily committed before that weekend? Could different medications or more intensive treatment have prevented what happened? Former FBI specialists who have reviewed the case point out that untreated or inadequately treated mental illness, especially when combined with substance abuse, creates a risk that can't always be predicted or controlled. Even families with unlimited resources, access to the best doctors, and genuine compassion can find themselves unable to save someone who has deteriorated beyond the point of intervention. The Reiner family tragedy isn't unique in its basic elements. Families across all economic levels struggle with mentally ill relatives who refuse treatment or don't respond to it. What makes this case extraordinary is only the fame of those involved and the very public nature of how it unfolded. Rob Reiner was 77 years old when he died. Michelle was 76. They had been married for decades and had built not just a family, but a legacy in Hollywood. Rob's films touched generations. He mentored young filmmakers. He advocated for children and families through his political activism and philanthropy. The man who created the loving grandfather figure in The Princess Bride, who understood human relationships so deeply that his films remain cultural touchstones, died at the hands of his own son. That irony is almost too painful to process. As the case moves through the legal system, more details will inevitably emerge. Nick Reiner remains in custody, isolated and under constant observation. The investigation continues. Forensic experts will testify. Psychiatrists will debate his mental state. Lawyers will argue over responsibility and culpability. But for those who knew Rob and Michelle Reiner personally, and for the millions who grew up with his films, the loss is about more than legal proceedings. It's about the shattering of trust, the failure of systems meant to help, and the devastating realization that sometimes love, even fierce, determined, unlimited love, isn't enough to save someone from their own darkness. The Brentwood home where Rob and Michelle died has been cleared by investigators. The police tape has come down. The neighborhood looks the same as it did before. But for the Reiner family and for everyone who witnessed what happened that December weekend, nothing will ever be the same. This is the story of what happened, based on police reports, witness statements, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence. It's a tragedy without clear villains or simple answers, just a family torn apart by illness, a system that couldn't help in time, and a weekend that ended 2 lives and devastated all the others.